If breakfast keeps sliding later as you get older, is that just a harmless change in routine? Or could it be telling you something about your health?
I would have guessed it was harmless. Retired people do not have to rush to school or work, so why would breakfast time matter?
That is the tempting explanation. But this study found that meal timing in older adults was connected not only with age, but also with illness, genetic tendencies, and survival.
So a later breakfast might be more than a preference?
Possibly. The key word is might. This was an observational study, so it can reveal patterns and associations, but it cannot prove that changing breakfast time will change how long someone lives.
Still, if meal timing reflects what is happening in the body or daily life, that could make it useful.
Exactly. The paper is titled Meal Timing Trajectories in Older Adults and Their Associations with Morbidity, Genetic Profiles, and Mortality.
So the researchers were not just asking what time do older people eat.
Right. They wanted to know how meal timing changes across years, what health and behavioral factors travel with those changes, whether genetic profiles are related, and whether timing is associated with all-cause mortality.
That makes breakfast sound less like a clock time trivia question and more like a possible health signal.
That is the interesting shift. The study treats meal timing as part of the broader pattern of aging, rather than as an isolated habit. Why would meal timing be especially worth studying in older adults?
Because aging can change sleep, mobility, appetite, health, social schedules, and probably a lot of other routines.
That is the general idea behind the research question. Older adults can become more vulnerable to mistimed food intake because health and environmental circumstances change with age.
But meal timing can mean several things. Which parts did they care about?
They looked at timing across the day, including breakfast and dinner, the midpoint of daily eating, and the length of the daily eating window.
So if breakfast moves later, but dinner does not move equally later, the eating window could shrink.
Exactly. And that is close to one of the broad age-related patterns they observed.
What made breakfast stand out?
Several health conditions were primarily associated with later breakfast. The abstract specifically names fatigue, oral health problems, depression, anxiety, and multimorbidity.
That is a pretty wide range. It suggests breakfast timing may sit at the intersection of physical health, mental health, and daily function.
Yes, but we have to be careful with direction. A later breakfast could reflect health changes could influence breakfast timing, or both could be linked through other factors.
So the better question is not, does late breakfast cause poor health, but what does a shift toward later breakfast accompany?
Precisely. That framing keeps us faithful to what this study can actually show. To answer that, the researchers used data from 2,945 community-dwelling older adults in the University of Manchester Longitudinal Study of Cognition in Normal Healthy Old Age.
And this was not a one-time snapshot, right?
Correct. Participants had up to 5 repeated assessments of meal timing and health behaviors, collected between 1983 and 2017.
That long time span is important because the researchers could look at trajectories, not just compare one early eater with one late eater on a single day.
Exactly. They used linear mixed effects models to study how meal timing changed with age and how it related to health and behavioral factors across repeated measurements.
What about the trajectory groups mentioned in the paper?
For that, they used latent class analysis. In simple terms, it is a statistical way to identify groups of people whose meal timing patterns follow similar paths over time, rather than forcing everyone into one average pattern.
And mortality?
They used Cox regression, to examine associations between meal timing and mortality over time.
They also looked at genetics. What exactly was compared?
They examined genetic scores related to chronotype and obesity. Chronotype is the tendency to be more of a morning type or an evening type.
So they could ask whether people genetically inclined toward eveningness also tended to eat later.
Yes, that is useful because it separates one plausible biological tendency from another genetic profile, obesity risk, within the analysis. The first major result was that older age was associated with later breakfast and dinner times, a later midpoint of eating, and a shorter daily eating window.
So aging was linked to both shifting meals later and compressing the period in which people ate.
Yes, but breakfast became especially important when the researchers looked at health. Fatigue, oral health problems, depression, anxiety, and multimorbidity were primarily associated with later breakfast timing.
That makes breakfast timing sound like a possible marker of broader change.
That is a reasonable interpretation, and the authors themselves conclude that later breakfast may reflect broader health changes in older adults.
What happened with the genetic results?
Genetic profiles related to an evening chronotype were linked to later meals. Genetic profiles related to obesity were not.
So the tendency to be an evening type lined up with meal timing, while the obesity genetic score did not show that same relationship.
Exactly. Then comes the result most likely to catch attention. Later breakfast timing was associated with increased mortality.
And the trajectory analysis also found early and late eating groups, right?
Yes. The 10-year survival rate was 86.7% in the late eating group and 89.5% in the early eating group.
That is a difference, but it does not mean delaying breakfast itself caused the lower survival.
Correct. The study shows an association. It does not establish a causal rule that moving breakfast earlier will necessarily improve survival. So, what should we actually take from this study without turning it into a simplistic eat breakfast early and live longer slogan?
Maybe the most useful lesson is to pay attention to changes in meal timing, especially if breakfast keeps moving later over time.
That is well aligned with the findings. In older adults, later breakfast was connected with several physical and psychological health problems and with higher mortality risk, while meal timing overall shifted with age.
So, a clock change could be a clue, not a diagnosis.
Exactly. Think of it like noticing that someone who always answered messages at 7 a.m. now does not get going until late morning. The schedule change itself does not tell you the cause, but it may prompt you to look at what else has changed.
And because fatigue, oral health problems, depression, anxiety, and multimorbidity were associated with later breakfast, the timing shift might be worth noticing in context.
Yes, the practical value is not to obsess over a specific breakfast minute. It is to recognize that meal timing can carry information about broader health and daily functioning.
And the genetics result adds another layer. Some people may naturally lean later because of evening chronotype tendencies.
Right, which is another reason not to moralize meal timing as simply good discipline or bad discipline.
So the strongest takeaway is that when meal timing changes with age, especially breakfast, it may be part of a larger health story.
Exactly. The paper turns an ordinary question, what time did you eat breakfast, into a potentially informative window on how aging, health, biological tendencies, and longevity are connected.